It started with something as small as a ribbon, a pale blue satin one, curled and tucked around a paper invitation that arrived late one Friday. I remember the way the light caught it as I held it near the window. My fingers traced its softness, and for a moment I thought of baby showers, hand-tied hair bows, birthdays from years ago. It was an invitation to their housewarming. New house, new life, new beginnings. The return address was theirs, Thomas and Aaron, my son and daughter-in-law. But the handwriting wasn't his. Aaron's cursive was smooth, looping in a way that made me think of frosting piped across a cake. Inside, the card was cream-colored, heavy stock, too elegant for something as simple as a family gathering. It smelled faintly of eucalyptus and something sharp, maybe rosemary oil. "Join us to celebrate our new home," it said. And I did celebrate, right there in my tiny living room, alone with the card. I pressed it to my chest and smiled into the afternoon sun that crept across the rug. I thought, maybe they want me to be part of this. Maybe this is the start of something healing. You see, there had been months of quiet. Not silence, but quiet. A different kind, the kind you don't notice until it's been there too long. Missed calls, a forgotten Mother's Day. But I didn't dwell. I never wanted to be one of those mothers, the kind that kept score. No, I raised Thomas to be free to find his path, his voice, his version of love. But I will admit, when the invitation came, I exhaled something I hadn't even known I was holding for weeks. I prepared like it was a wedding. I took out my best scarf, the navy one with gold thread. I bought in Istanbul with Harold back in '84. It still smelled faintly of lavender, sachets, and old perfume. I ironed it carefully and laid it across my armchair like a crown. I made my signature almond lemon cookies. It's the ones Thomas used to beg for every spring when the lemons came in sour and strong. I shaped each one carefully, pressing the middle with my thumb just like I used to when he was a child before football games. After dentist visits, whenever the world got too loud, the night before the party, I soaked my feet and trimmed my nails. I used the pink polish that had dried a little at the edges, but still gave my toes a soft shimmer. I curled my hair, slow and careful, around sponge rollers. Then slept propped up so the curls would hold. It had been years since I was in their part of town. I called a car service, couldn't trust my knees for the train anymore, and packed the cookies in a floral tin, lined with wax paper and sealed with a quiet ribbon of twine. As we pulled into their street, I was struck by how perfect everything looked. Tall white gates, fresh mulch, glass doors that caught the afternoon sun like water. I stood at the curb for a moment longer than I should have, adjusting my scarf in the side mirror of the car. It was then I saw them through the window, laughing, arms around each other. Aaron was wearing something yellow. Thomas was tipping a glass toward his lips. People milled about behind them, sipping, smiling, the kind of party that breathes confidence. That speaks its own language. And I told myself, you belong here too. You're part of this. But when I rang the bell, it took a long time for anyone to come. Erin opened the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, hi," she said, blinking. "I didn't realize you'd made it." Handed her the cookie tin. She took it, hesitated, then placed it on a console table behind her without looking inside. There was no hug, no, "You look beautiful," or "We're so glad you're here." I stepped into the house, and it smelled of white lilies and something expensive. I couldn't name, candle wax, new paint, hint of bergamot. People barely looked up as I passed. Most didn't know me. Few glanced politely and nodded. Searched for Thomas in the crowd. He was near the back doors, talking to a couple in sleek, black clothes. He didn't see me at first. When he did, there was a flash of something, surprise, embarrassment. He came over and kissed my cheek, quick and cool. "Mom," he said, "glad you made it." I held on to that sentence like it was a rope. The kitchen was bright and too white. All chrome and marble and jars filled with things no one would ever cook with. There was a cake, gluten-free, and canapes on black trays. I found a stool by the island and sat quietly, folding my hands over my purse, No one asked me anything. Erin introduced me once to someone whose name I forgot immediately. She called me Tom's mom. Not Margaret, not Mom. Later, I went to use the bathroom. The door down the hall was slightly open, and I paused, thinking it might be the powder room. But what I heard made me freeze. It was Erin. Her voice carried low and sharp. She was speaking to someone, maybe a friend or her sister, I mean. She won't even notice. Erin was saying, a hint of annoyance in her voice. Half the time she doesn't understand what's going on anyway. It's just easier if she's not in the loop. A laugh followed. Not hers. Someone else's? I stepped back. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stared down at the patterned rug beneath my shoes, red and cream and just slightly uneven where the fibers had been crushed. Then I turned and walked back into the living room, smiling at no one. When the evening ended, I called the car myself. Thomas didn't walk me out. Erin said thanks again, without looking up from her phone. The cookie tin was still on the table, unopened. I picked it up as I left Dot in the car ride home. I sat with it on my lap like it was a newborn, like something fragile and still mine. The twine had come loose. A corner of the wax paper had lifted. I looked down at my pink polished nails and remembered how Thomas used to help me paint them when he was little, using a cotton swab dipped in remover to erase the extra bits. "I'll make them perfect, Mommy," he used to say. "Perfect like you." And I think that's when it broke. Not all at once, but with a soft inward crack. The kind you don't hear until later when you're alone in the kitchen taking your shoes off and you realize something inside you doesn't fit the same way anymore. I placed the cookies on my counter and sat down with a cup of tea. The good kind. The one I keep for guests. Dot's steam rose in soft curls, fogging the corner of my glasses. I took a sip. The heat burned my tongue a little, but I didn't flinch. Dot outside. The wind had picked up. The scarf slipped from my shoulders as I leaned forward, elbows on the table, listening to the quiet tick of the clock and the clink of my spoon against the cup. I had waited for them, believed in them. Believed the ribbon on the invitation meant inclusion, that the party meant return, but it hadn't been about me at all. I thought of Erin's voice again. She won't even notice. But I had. I noticed everything. And though I didn't know it yet, that was the beginning, the moment where hope turned. On its edge, not into bitterness, but into stillness. It's a kind of prelude to the long silence that would follow. I didn't cry. I just refolded the ribbon and placed it in my keepsake box beside the old photos and birthday cards. Something was ending and something else, quiet, deliberate, sharp, was just beginning. It didn't happen all at once. Not like a slammed door or a shouted goodbye. It was slower. It's quieter. It's like a leak behind the walls. You don't see it until the plaster bubbles and the damage is already done. The morning after the party, opened the curtains and waited for the sun to warm the tiles beneath my bare feet. It used to be my favorite moment of the day. Coffee brewing, the kettle humming like a quiet companion. Birds picking at the windowsill feeder Harold installed decades ago. I always used to hum while I stirred my tea, usually something Sinatra or Patsy Cline, something soft and slow. That matched the light. But that morning, I didn't hum. I sat at the kitchen table with the unopened cookie tin in front of me and my cell phone beside it, waiting for thank you, a message, a sign that someone noticed. Anything, nothing came. The first week I told myself they were busy, that they were probably cleaning up from the party, writing thank you notes, settling into the new space. I told myself. Erin must have simply forgotten, but maybe Thomas would call once things calmed down. I left the tin sealed, a quiet reminder. It's like a small weight placed on my day. The second week, I sent a message. Just a simple one. Hi, sweetie. Just wanted to say thank you for inviting me. Your home is beautiful. Hope you're settling in well. Let me know if you ever need help unpacking or anything. Love, Mom. The little bubble showed delivered. But there was no reply. I began to look for signs of them in small things. I lingered at the supermarket near the almond milk Erin used to buy. I stared too long at a mustard jello cardigan in the shop window because it reminded me of the dress she wore at the party. I refreshed my phone more than I like to admit, checking the green dot beside their names, scrolling past old texts, like I was looking for evidence in a case I didn't want to solve. Eventually, I left another voicemail. "Hey, Thomas, just wanted to check in. Haven't heard from you, so I thought I'd call. I'm doing fine. Hope you both are too. I made lasagna today. Your favorite. Froze some if you want to stop by." I ended it with a chuckle that wasn't real and waited. The phone calls didn't just slow. They stopped. Birthdays passed. His, mine, on Mother's Day. I made my own card, not to send, but to feel like something had arrived. I wrote "Happy Mother's Day" across the top of an old notepad page and placed it by my sink. Like it was from someone who remembered. I told no one. Sometimes I sat on the porch, just to watch the world prove it was still moving. Children chasing balls down the sidewalk. The smell of someone grilling in the distance. The mailman's shadow stretching longer across the lawn. My neighbor, Carol, came by now and then. She brought soup or asked if I wanted to come to bingo on Thursdays. I thanked her, always politely, but I rarely said yes. There was something about being surrounded by many friendly strangers that made the silence in my life feel louder. I preferred my chair, the old one with the flattened cushion where Harold used to sit and read his newspaper. From there, I could hear the house breathing, the old pipes, the creak of the ceiling fan, the sigh of the wind through the doorframe. One afternoon, Carol stood in my driveway holding a little bag of oranges. She looked hesitant, like she was unsure whether to hand them to me or not. "I saw your boy," she said finally, handing them over. I blinked. "Thomas." She nodded. "At the Coupont Maple. With Aaron. They had one of those fancy carts, full of greens and bottled water. Looked like they were getting ready for something." I smiled, but it didn't reach anywhere. "Oh, they looked good. Happy." I thanked her for the oranges. When she left, I stood at the sink for a long time, peeling one orange slice by slice. The skin came off cleanly. I lined the slices on a plate and stared at them like tiny suns. That night, I wrote a letter I didn't send. "Dear Thomas, I hope you know I never expected everything. Just something. A call, a message. A memory that still meant something to you." I folded it and tucked it behind an old photo of him. Age 5, holding a paper crown he made in kindergarten. Back then, he used to call me Queen Mommy. Now I felt like a ghost in my own bloodline. I started walking every morning just 20 minutes around the neighborhood, past the lilac bush that still leaned too far onto the sidewalk, past the little free library box someone painted teal and filled with old cookbooks and outdated travel guides. I never took a book, but I always straightened the ones inside. It helped to move, breathe in the cool air, and let my shoes scuff the same route each day. Sometimes I imagined I was walking towards something, a new place, a different life, a reason. Other times I just walked to remember I existed. They say being forgotten doesn't happen in one sharp snap. It's a fade, slow dissolve. And it's true. It crept in like fog. Like steam on a mirror, you don't notice it until the reflection's gone. I stopped sending messages. I stopped checking my phone after dinner. I stopped baking one day. I opened the cookie tin from the party. The almond lemon cookies were stale, slightly soft at the edges. I ate one anyway, slowly, in silence. It still tasted like the past. Then I threw the rest away in early fall. I saw a post from a friend of Aaron's. I wasn't looking for it. It just appeared. An Instagram story screenshot someone shared on Facebook, a smiling group photo. Hey there. House. Again. The caption read, "Grateful to be surrounded by chosen family." I stared at it for a long time. Chosen, as if birth and blood were options on a form. As if I were something picked up and then quietly set down when the color didn't match the room. That night, turned off all the lights in the house except the lamp by my bed. I sat up reading for hours, but I couldn't absorb a single word. My eyes moved across the page, but my mind circled one phrase again and again. Chosen family. I wondered what I had been reduced to. Background noise. A name on a contact list they never opened. An obligation they were slowly setting free. I cried that night. Not loudly. Just enough for the tears to catch in my throat and not fall. It wasn't grief exactly. Was something quieter. The feeling of being gently erased, of your name still being there. But only in pencil. In the winter, I began volunteering again. The community center still remembered me. They needed help with the Sunday lunch table. Folding napkins, preparing sandwiches, setting out water cups with quiet hands, and a practiced. I mattered. Not for what I gave, but because I showed up. 'Cause someone noticed if I didn't. The other volunteers were kind. Older women with eyes that had seen things but didn't speak of them. We shared silent understandings. We knew what it felt like to be missed by no one. There's a special kind of silence that comes from being unneeded. It doesn't scream, doesn't knock over vases. It just settles. It moves into your shoes. And your pantry shelves into the sweaters you stop wearing. The recipes you stop pulling out. The table you no longer set for company. But it also makes space, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to feel something shift. Like a tremor beneath the foundation. Not anger. Not yet. Just awareness. I was still here, I was still noticing. And eventually I would do something about it. But for now, I simply lived in the distance. In the widening gap between who I was to them and who I still was to myself. The truth didn't come in a dramatic explosion. Never does. It came while I was paying the gas bill. Just a Tuesday morning, early spring, soft light coming in. From the window above the sink, I'd folded the towels, fed the cat next door for Carol, and was sitting at the kitchen table with my tea and my reading glasses tilted slightly down my nose. The envelopes were stacked neatly. One for the gas, one for the water, one addressed in my own handwriting, a card for my friend Eleanor's birthday. I moved slowly that morning, the kind of slowness that doesn't come from pain but from no one needing you to move faster. As I opened the utility bill, I noticed a charge on my linked credit card I didn't recognize. West End Home and Garden. It's $346.90. My brow furrowed. I hadn't been to the garden center since Harold died. I hadn't bought anything new for the house, not even a potted plant. I set down the mug and pulled the drawer open. It's the one where I keep the statements and sticky notes and the emergency. Flashlight that no longer works. I logged into the account. There were more. A designer throw blanket from a boutique store I'd never heard of. Streaming subscription in a name that wasn't mine. And then one that made my breath catch. Brimwell Nursery Tuition, $2,450 nursery. A child's school. I blinked. Thomas and Aaron had no children, or so I thought. I stared at the screen, willing the words to rearrange themselves into something sensible. I clicked the payment history. That charge had been recurring every 2 months. It had been going on for nearly a year. A year I hadn't been told. I hadn't been included. I sat there for what felt like hours. The tea going cold beside my hand. I didn't touch anything. Let the quiet fill the room, the truth sitting across from me like an unwelcome guest. When I finally stood, my legs felt strange, like they no longer belonged to me. I moved through the house slowly, touching familiar things. The crocheted blanket on the armchair, the dish towel looped on the oven door. A photograph of Thomas at 12, his gap-toothed grin frozen in time, that day. I didn't cry. I just watched the light shift across the floor and felt something new blooming, not heartbreak. Not yet, but suspicion. Later that afternoon, I opened Facebook I hadn't been on in months. The login screen still had Harold's old email pre-filled. I wiped it clean with my sleeve and typed mine in instead. I didn't search for Thomas directly instead. I searched for Aaron's sister Mallory. She always posted too much. That was her way. Birthday cakes, brunches, hashtags, and blurry baby photos filtered through the same pinkish hue. And there it was, a post from 6 weeks ago. A child, about 2 years old, chubby arms raised in the air, wearing a t-shirt that said tiny human. big energy, and standing in the doorway of Thomas and Aaron's new house. Caption: when your nephew knows, he rules the roost. Hashtag babygram. Hashtag family first. I stared. My hand touched the edge of the screen. Nephew, that was my grandchild. I hadn't known he was born. I hadn't been told he existed. No calls, no photo. Announcement? Snow visit? I didn't know his name. I clicked through her photos. There were dozens first birthday balloons. K, Halloween costume? A small lion? K, a video of him taking a wobbly step in their kitchen, Thomas's voice in the background. That's it, buddy. That's my boy. That's my boy. Mine. My Thomas. Saying those words to a child I had never held. His birth I hadn't been invited to witness. His first breath happened while I was home organizing the pantry or writing letters no one would read. I don't know how long I sat there, the photos slipping one into the next, each one cutting a little deeper than the last. They had built a life, a whole life, and carved me out of it like I was something spoiled. And yet they had used my money. I checked my banking app, the accounts I had let Thomas help manage after Harold passed, the trust account, modest but meaningful. It's one that had been meant for emergencies, for family needs. I had given him access because I believed in him, because I believed that blood meant loyalty. And now I saw what they had done, carefully, quietly, as if they were so sure I'd never notice. Maybe they even thought I didn't have the mind for it anymore. She won't even notice. That sentence rose again, like smoke from a fire that had never been put out. But I had noticed. I noticed everything the next morning. I pulled out the photo albums. I hadn't touched them in years. They sat beneath a bed in a plastic bin, smelling faintly of dust and cedar. I spread them across the floor. Thomas in his baseball uniform, grass-stained and smiling. Thomas asleep on my chest when he was just 3 weeks old, his hand curled against my neck. Thomas on the beach with Harold building a crooked sandcastle. I ran my fingers across each one, careful not to smudge, and then I imagined someone doing the same with that baby, the one they kept from me. Would he ever know me? Would he even learn my name? Or would I be erased entirely? The sad old woman who lived once upon a time in the stories they never told. I called my lawyer. Her name was Melissa. We'd met when Harold set up our estate documents. She was sharp, kind, efficient. She remembered me right away. I'd like to review my accounts, I said. She didn't ask questions. She booked me for Thursday morning, and for the first time in a long time, I felt steady, like a door had opened not one into their life, but one out of the shadows they'd left me in. I made a list. Close, shared accounts, remove. Thomas as joint holder secure property deed review. Living Willie wrote it in ink. No more pencil, no more waiting. That night I walked into the guest room. I opened the closet and pulled out a suitcase. The good one, leather trimmed. A gift from Harold when we retired. I set it on the bed not because I was leaving, but because I could. And that knowledge, that simple shift, felt like a match struck in a long dark room. They had hidden a child from me, a piece of my own lineage, erased with intention, and yet they took my money. They spoke my name when it suited them as a signature, a deposit, a favor, but not as a person, not as a mother, not as a woman who had bled and bent and sacrificed before I slept. I wrote another letter. Dear Thomas, I found out. I hope one day you'll realize what that means. I didn't send it. I folded it into a blank journal I had once planned to fill with stories for a grandchild I never met. The first page was still empty, but not for long. I didn't rehearse what I was going to say, not because I didn't have the words. I had too many. They had gathered in me like water behind a dam, tight, pressurized, knew that if I started with a script, I'd lose myself inside it. I needed to speak plainly, quietly, like someone who wasn't asking for permission anymore. I picked a Wednesday morning. They'd be home. Erin worked from her laptop most days, some kind of digital marketing I never quite understood. Thomas had taken up remote consulting project management. He'd once called it though I had never seen a project or a manager in their house. I called first, no answer. I texted, coming by in 20 minutes. Need to talk? Please be home. No. Reply. But I went anyway. It was warm for spring. I wore the slate gray cardigan Thomas gave me for my 70th back when birthdays still mattered. I remember opening the box and seeing the tissue paper fold back like a curtain, revealing soft wool and a price tag still attached. He had looked proud of it, as if the receipt proved something. I held onto that cardigan like it was armor now, when I arrived, Erin opened the door. This time, there was no pause. She stepped back with a neutral expression, said nothing. The house smelled like citrus cleaner and expensive coffee. Music played softly from a corner speaker, something electronic, thudding faintly under our conversation like a pulse I wasn't invited into. Thomas came in from the patio. His face was unreadable, but I knew him well enough to recognize the flicker of discomfort behind his practiced calm. "Mom," he said, "is everything okay?" I sat down on one of their modern chairs. It looked elegant but felt like sitting on polished stone. I looked at both of them and I said, in the calmest voice I've ever used, "I know about the baby." Silence. Not the kind that gasps, the kind that calcifies. Erin glanced at Thomas. He inhaled like he might explain something. Instead, he leaned against the kitchen island and looked down at his hands. "I saw the tuition payment," I said. "And the photos, they didn't deny it." Erin just folded her arms and stared at the refrigerator like it might offer her an escape. "You had a child," I continued, "and chose not to tell me." Thomas sighed. "Mom, it's complicated." "It's not," I said softly. "You made a choice." And I noticed. Erin finally spoke. "We didn't tell you because we didn't want the pressure," she said. "It was a rough pregnancy. And then when he was born, we were overwhelmed. Didn't know how to include you. And honestly, it didn't feel natural." "Natural," I repeated. She kept going, her voice gaining momentum, like someone trying to justify a wound after the bleeding has stopped. "You live in your own world. You wouldn't have understood our parenting style. And you overstep sometimes. It's exhausting." I told Thomas it would just be easier, less confusing, if we kept it simple. I looked at her for a long time, then turned to Thomas. "You. Let her do that," I asked. "Let her decide what I should and shouldn't know." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Mom, please. It doesn't have to be a big deal. It already is." I said, "There was a time when I would have raised my voice, when I would have demanded to be heard. But not anymore." Now I knew that silence was heavier than shouting. I saw the payments. I said, "You used my money. The trust account. The credit card I left open for emergencies." Erin blinked. Thomas finally spoke. "I was going to tell you," he said. "I meant to. But once we started using it, it was just easier to keep going. You weren't spending it. And we needed help." "You needed help," I said, slowly, but not family. He didn't respond. "I made you cookies," I said. "Do you remember that? At your party. I wore my best scarf. I ironed it by hand." Erin exhaled. "Margaret, please. Don't make this dramatic." I turned to her. That was when it shifted. Not the room, not their posture. Me, something inside me settled, clicked. I wasn't pleading anymore. I saw her clearly. Not as the woman my son married, but as someone who had erased me with deliberate precision, who had measured me and found me inconvenient, who had removed me from a narrative I helped build and Thomas had let her. That's what hurt most, not Erin's coldness, but his quiet permission. "I used to sing to you," I said, looking at my son, "when you were 5. When your stomach hurt from too much lemonade. When you couldn't sleep unless I sat beside your bed and counted backward from 50. He looked at the floor. "I taught you how to tie your shoes. I held your hand at your father's funeral. I sold jewelry. I loved to help you through grad school." Still silence. "And now I have a grandchild." I said, "One I have never seen. It's because you both decided I was too much trouble." Erin Folded her arms again, Thomas muttered. We didn't want the drama. That broke something. I stood, not quickly, not angrily, just finally. I looked around their kitchen, all perfect angles and glass jars and pristine counters. This wasn't my home. It wasn't my life. And clearly I was not part of it. Thank you, I said quietly. Thomas looked up. What? Thank you, I repeated. Because now I know exactly where I stand. Aaron looked relieved. Good. I'm glad you're being reasonable. I almost laughed. I walked toward the door and stopped beside the photo wall. There were dozens of framed pictures, vacations, brunches, baby photos, group shots with people I didn't recognize. Not one of me, not one of Harold. I traced my finger across the edge of the frame. You didn't just forget me, okay? I said, you deleted me. Back at home, I took off the cardigan and folded it neatly into the donation bag. I sat at my kitchen table and wrote 2 letters, one to my lawyer, confirming everything we discussed: power of attorney, updated will, removal of access, and one to myself. A promise, no more waiting, no more guessing. From now on, everything I do is for the woman who noticed everything and stayed silent for far too long. They would call once a week later. Thomas left a voicemail. His voice was tight, measured. Mom, I don't know what you're trying to prove, but this is unnecessary. Call me back. I didn't. That afternoon, I watered the plants. I played Sinatra and danced a little, barefoot across the linoleum. I made soup from scratch. I folded the towels in thirds instead of halves, just because and when I passed the mirror, I didn't look away. They may have dismissed me, they may have labeled me too much, but I was still here, still whole, still standing, and I was not done. The strange thing about starting over at 71 is how quiet it is. There are no trumpets, no declarations, just the small, deliberate acts of becoming someone again, this time on your own terms. After I confronted them, the house was still. My phone stayed silent. The kettle still whistled. The morning light still filtered in, soft as always. But inside me, something had shifted. I used to feel like I was waiting in a room that no one remembered. Locking. Sitting politely, hands folded, waiting to be let back in. Now, I realized the door had always been open. I just hadn't stood up and walked through it, so I did first. I called Melissa, my lawyer. We sat across from each other at her office. Downtown, a small room that smelled of paper and lemon polish. I wore a deep burgundy sweater and the pearl earrings I'd tucked away in a drawer after Harold's funeral. I wanted to look like someone who still had say in her own story. I'd like to revise everything, I told her. My will. Trust all of it. She nodded, quietly opening the folder with my name on it. We went through it line by line. She guided me with the gentle firmness I needed. By the end of the meeting, Thomas and Aaron were no longer beneficiaries. Their names were gone from every document, replaced by a scholarship fund in Harold's name, and a bequest to the community center where I'd begun volunteering again. Melissa slid the final page toward me, her pen poised. Are you sure? She asked softly. I didn't even hesitate. I signed. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like restoration. Next, I visited the bank. I closed the shared account Thomas had access to. I opened a new one in my name only and moved every last cent. The young teller smiled politely, asked if I needed help setting up online access. I declined. I still remembered how. On the way out, I passed the glass door and caught my reflection. I didn't look frail. I didn't look invisible. I looked like a woman who had just taken her name back at home. I began clearing drawers, not because I was moving, not yet, but because I needed to touch every part of my life again. I sorted through old scarves, letters, cookbooks, and envelopes of forgotten photos. I found a picture of Harold holding a fishing rod, grinning with half his hair ruffled by the wind. I found a postcard from Thomas's first school trip where he wrote, "I miss you, Mommy," in crooked letters. I kept some. I threw others away. Letting go isn't about anger. It's about making space. Carol came by one afternoon, knocking gently, holding a potted violet. I thought you could use a bit of color, she said, setting it on my kitchen table. I smiled. It's beautiful. She paused before sitting. Have you heard from them? I shook my head. Good, she said, and took a sip of tea. We didn't say anything else about it. Just shared the quiet, sometimes the most healing conversations. Are the ones with no explanation at all? I started taking the long way home from the market, past the houses with the ivy-covered fences, past the bench Harold and I used to sit on with ice cream cones. I started noticing things again, dogs behind gates, children drawing with chalk, the smell of fresh bread at the corner bakery. I wasn't part of Thomas's world anymore, but that didn't mean I had no world at all. One afternoon, I walked into the real estate office 3 blocks from my house. It was small, clean, bright, full of framed photos of sold homes and plastic houseplants that pretended to be ferns. Can I help you? The receptionist asked. Yes, I said, placing my palms on the counter. I'd like to get a valuation on my home. She blinked. Are you planning to sell? Not yet, I said, but I'd like to know what it's worth in case I ever want to leave quietly. Smiled as I said it, and that smile stayed with me the rest of the day. I didn't tell anyone. Not Carol, not the women at the community center, not even the journal where I scribbled poems and recipes and the occasional midnight thought. Some things are meant to be known only by the woman who earns them. That week, I changed my power of attorney. I updated my emergency contact. I spoke to a woman at the senior services office who told me about housing options should I ever want to downsize. And I tucked the pamphlet into a folder labeled Someday. And for the first time in years, I realized I wasn't afraid of that day anymore. Aaron had once said, I wouldn't notice, but I noticed everything now. The way the towels smelled after a warm dryer cycle, the crispness of a fresh bed sheet. Way the kitchen tile cooled under my bare feet at night. I noticed the way silence wasn't empty. It was a space I could fill with things I loved. I began cooking again. Not for anyone else, just for me. I made rosemary bread from scratch, roasted sweet potatoes, apple tart with cinnamon and orange zest. I plated everything carefully, sat at the table with a cloth napkin and a lit candle, and ate slowly. It tasted like memory and decision. I bought a red lipstick. I hadn't worn color on my lips in years, not since Harold passed and the holidays became smaller and quieter. The girl at the drugstore smiled as she rang it up. Oh, this shade's called Resilient Ruby, she said, holding it up. I laughed softly. Sounds about right. That night, I stood in the mirror and applied it. It didn't make me look younger. It made me look awake. I wrote a letter to my grandchild. I didn't know if I'd ever send it. I didn't know if he'd ever know me. But I wanted something too. Exist in the world that proved I cared even if no one told him. To my grandson, you were born and I wasn't told. But I knew, I felt it. You are part of me, even if you never hear my name. I would have baked for you, held you. I would have made you laugh with silly songs and bedtime stories that never made sense. And if you ever find this, if someday you wonder who I was, just know I was watching the stars the night you were born. And I smiled. I placed it in the same journal I had once saved 4 stories. The first page was no longer blank. By spring's end. The house felt lighter. I moved more icily. I slept through the night. I laughed, really laughed, when Carol brought over a cheesecake that collapsed in the center. And we ate it anyway, straight from the dish. I had reinvented nothing extraordinary. I had simply returned to myself, and that was more than enough. I didn't erase them. I didn't need to. I had removed the hooks they once held in me, the guilt, the hope. The waiting dot, and that removal was its own kind of miracle. It was a Thursday morning in late May when I decided. I was done, not in anger, not in grief, just done. I remember the sun had just reached the far end of the kitchen. laying gold across the ting, laying gold across the counter like a ribbon of light. The kettle had just finished whistling. I stood with my cup, holding it gently, watching a single wisp of steam curl toward the ceiling. And I realized I hadn't thought about them in days. Not Thomas. Not Aaron. Not the child whose name I still didn't know. That realization came softly, like the click of a drawer sliding shut. I had disappeared from their lives a long time ago. It was only fair that started with the simplest things. I blocked their numbers. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't make an announcement. I just opened my contacts, hovered for a moment over Thomas's name, the same name I had typed so many times when he was at college. When I wanted to tell him about a thunderstorm, or a good soup, or just that I missed him. And then I pressed block. Aaron's number went next. I didn't even blink. Then came the emails. The shared streaming account. The cloud folder Thomas once set up to help me with tech stuff. Gone. It felt like sweeping out a room that had long stopped being used. I canceled the family Christmas mailing list, took down the framed photo of their wedding from the hallway. I didn't smash it or burn it. I'm not theatrical. I simply slipped it out of the frame and tucked it into a box labeled archive. I replaced it with a watercolor I'd painted years ago of a red teacup sitting in the snow, quiet, undisturbed. Mine. Carol. Noticed first we were sitting on my porch, drinking iced tea, her hat tilted low to block the sun. You're humming again, she said, smiling without looking up. Am I? She nodded. You only hum when you feel like yourself. I hadn't realized it, but yes, I was humming. Something soft and low from the radio station Harold used to leave on during long drives. That night, I danced barefoot in the kitchen. Just me and the shadows and the clink of ice in a glass, and I did not think of Thomas once. 2 weeks later, I took a little trip. I didn't tell anyone, not even Carol. I booked a small cabin by the lake where Harold and I spent our third anniversary. The place was quiet, mostly empty in early summer. I packed my bag with 2 dresses, a sun hat, my journal, and that tube of lipstick that had become a kind of punctuation mark in my life. The drive was peaceful. Fields rolled past like a painting unrolling beside the road. The silence was thick, but not heavy. At the cabin, I opened all the windows, let the air in, listened to birds I couldn't name. Every morning, I wrote one sentence. In my journal, I am still here. It became a prayer. It's a statement. It's a boundary. Back home, there were 3 voicemails, all from Thomas. His voice was tight, slightly forced. I could hear Aaron in the background of one, asking if he'd tried calling. The old number again. The messages were hollow. Hey, Mom, just checking in. Then, I guess you're busy. And then, later, we need to talk. Not okay that you're ignoring us. This is childish. I deleted all 3. There was nothing to say. I saw them once from a distance. They were walking into the cafe across town. Aaron was carrying a tote bag. Thomas was pushing a stroller. I didn't flinch. I didn't stare. I simply turned down the opposite street and kept walking. They didn't see me, or maybe they did, but by then, I was someone else. I began planning. A move. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. I called a realtor I trusted, a quiet woman named Layla, who understood discretion. We spoke in her office, just the 2 of us, sipping coffee that tasted faintly of cardamom. I'm not running, I told her. I'm simply choosing peace. She nodded and handed me a short list of quiet towns with small houses and trees. That turned fire orange in the fall. The thought of starting fresh didn't frighten me. It excited me because disappearing wasn't vanishing into thin air. It was walking out of the spotlight. They never noticed was on me at the community center. I signed up for a creative writing workshop. The first session was clumsy, full of people stumbling through poems and stories about childhood and heartbreak and hope. But I loved it. Every week, I brought a story from my life. Never about Thomas. Never about betrayal. Just small things. How my mother taught me to embroider the smell of Harold's aftershave. The way the sky looked on the day I turned 40. One afternoon, the facilitator, a young woman named Priya, looked at me and said, "You write like someone who's just come back from something." I smiled. I have. They sent a card in July, no return address. Inside was a photo of a boy, round-faced, dimpled, dressed in overalls. It was folded beside a note written in Thomas's handwriting. "We wanted you to meet him. This is Evan. He's ours. We're sorry you found out the way you did. No signature, no warmth. Just paper." I held it for a long time. Then I tucked it into the journal beside the letter I wrote months ago. The one to a grandson I never met. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't respond, because silence is sometimes the only thing that tells the truth. I had spent years shrinking, years trying to take up less space so others could be comfortable. I had made my love so quiet it had become invisible, but I wasn't invisible anymore. I had disappeared from their lives, not as punishment, but as preservation. They may one day knock on the door of a house I no longer live in. They may call a number that doesn't ring. They may send letters that are forwarded to places they'll never know, but I won't be waiting sometimes. I sit on the porch and imagine Evan, what he might look like when he's 10, what he might sound like when he says, "I miss her." Even if he doesn't quite know who the her is, maybe someday he'll ask questions. Maybe he won't. But if he does, I've left something behind. Stories, letters, a recipe book with my handwriting, photographs labeled carefully in pen, enough for him to know that once he had a grandmother, one who noticed everything, one who chose peace over permission, one who left before they realized. She was gone. A year passed like the quiet turning of a page. No fanfare, no calls, no sudden reckoning. It's just time, soft and steady, like rain tapping on a windowsill. And in that time, I became someone I hadn't been in years. Not someone new, someone remembered. The house I moved into wasn't large, a one-story cottage near the edge of a coastal town with ivy climbing the chimney and lavender growing wild along the back fence. The windows rattled when it stormed. The porch creaked when I walked across it barefoot. I loved every inch. I chose it myself, toured it alone, signed the deed with my full name, underlined twice. It was mine. No one knew the address except Carol, who I still called every Sunday. We talked about birds and neighbors and the strange way time folds itself. When you stop waiting, she never asked about Thomas. I never brought him up. We'd learned to speak around old pain without needing to revisit it. That, too, was a kind of peace. My days were simple and rich. I made jam from the mulberries that grew near the woods. I joined a book club of women who met in a converted greenhouse and drank tea from mismatched cups. I adopted a cat, a gray one, with white paws and a temperamental meow. I named him Oliver after the first boy who kissed my hand in 6th grade. I wrote stories again. Some were true, some were half true. Some were just wishes disguised as fiction, and every morning I made my bed with the same care I once saved. For guests now, I did it for myself. On the first anniversary of the day, I blocked Thomas's number. I lit a candle in the kitchen, not in mourning. In ritual, I sat at the table, poured myself a cup of strong tea, and reread the journal that had quietly grown heavy with all the letters I'd written to Evan, to myself, to the woman I used to be. I did not regret my choice. I had not disappeared from life. I had simply disappeared from the role. They wrote for me without asking. Evan's photo still lived in my journal. I looked at it sometimes not to ache, just to remember that I had the capacity to love someone I'd never held, and that love, even unreturned, was still mine to give. One Sunday in late spring, I was watering the lavender when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A car had pulled up to the edge of the drive. It wasn't familiar, sleek, silver, a rental most likely. The engine cut. A door opened. I didn't move. A figure stepped out. Young, hesitant. Not Thomas. Not Aaron. A girl, no more than 16, maybe 17, with a long braid and nervous hands. She approached slowly, holding something wrapped in brown paper. "Are you Margaret?" she asked. I nodded. She smiled cautiously. "I'm Lily. I live down the road. My grandmother used to know you, I think." "Carol?" I blinked. "She passed last winter," the girl continued softly. "She left me some things, including a box of letters addressed to you. I thought maybe you'd—" I did. "Want them?" I took the package with careful hands. The girl left with a polite nod and a quiet step. I brought the bundle inside and unwrapped it on the kitchen table. Inside were Carol's letters written over the last year. It seemed each one dated. Neat cursive across cream stationery. I read them all in one sitting. She'd written about her health, her thoughts on forgiveness, her memories of me and Harold, her belief that silence sometimes was the strongest boundary and the deepest wound. In the last letter she wrote, "You were always more than they saw, Margaret, and you deserved someone to say it." I cried for the first time in months, not out of grief, but out of gratitude. That summer, I taught a memoir class at the library. 12 people signed up. Only 5 stayed the whole course. But we shared things. Stories, laughter, quiet glances when someone's words felt too close to say aloud. One day, a woman in her 60s, Ruth, shared a story about being told she was too much by her grown children. Afterward, she asked me, "Did you ever feel that way?" I smiled once, and I said, "No more." Peace wasn't loud. It didn't arrive with declarations or applause. It came in the rhythm of daily life. The folding of dish towels, the cracking of creme brulee with the back of a spoon, the breeze through a cracked window at dusk. It came when I realized I no longer dreamed of being found. I had already found myself in early fall. I received a letter, no return address. The handwriting was familiar, a little rushed, a little uncertain. It was from Thomas. "I don't know if this will reach you. I don't know if you'll want it. But Evan is asking questions now. He found a photo of you, one Carol gave us before she passed. He asked, 'Who's this?' And I realized I had no good answer. There was more, but I didn't finish reading, not out of cruelty. I just didn't need it anymore. I tucked the letter into a drawer beside the others. Then I walked outside where the lavender had dried on the patanjan, and we all left on the stem, and the sky was beginning to pinken with evening. I sat on the porch with Oliver curled beside me and a blanket wrapped around my knees, and I thought not of what I had lost, but of what I had made. A life. A silence that was chosen. Not forced out a self that was no longer a reaction to someone else's absence. I don't know if Evan will ever meet me. I don't know if Thomas will ever understand what he gave up, but I know this. I am not waiting. I am not hoping. I am not erasing the past, but I no longer live inside it. When the wind blows across the porch, I sometimes whisper my own name into it. Not so someone can hear, but so I can because for too long, I was a mother first, a helper second, and myself only when the house was dark and no one was watching. Now I say my name aloud, and it sounds like home. Final line. I noticed everything, and then I chose myself.